Welcome to the University of Michigan Dentistry Podcast Series, promoting oral health care worldwide.
Our purpose in this exercise is to introduce to the class the rotary and hand cutting instruments. The procedure that we will follow will relate to carrying out simple cutting procedures on a mounted extracted tooth. The class is familiar with the straight hand piece, having used this in the prophylaxis sequence of the fall term. This exercise will relate to the low-speed angle hand piece with the friction grip head and the air turbine with the application of the various round and fissure burrs required for this type of cavity sequence. The half round, 1 round, 2 round, 4 round, and 6 round burrs, the 56 and 57 fissure burrs will be utilized in this exercise. The low-speed angle handpiece with the electro-torque motor utilizing the friction grip head will be used for the refinement caries removal phase of the operation. To follow that theme, we will insert the burr into the low-speed friction grip head by placing the burr in as we have shown and follow the complete insertion using the flat side of the burr tool to seat the burr completely. The instrument is now ready for operating sequence. In the continuing the rotary instrument package, the ultra-speed air turbine instrument, the main function of the rotary cutting package, will be utilized for penetrating into and through the enamel area of the tooth, and for the extending type cuts, which will describe or result in the prepared cavity. Burr insertion with the air turbine of this type is carried out by using a wrench with an Allen insert with approximately 1/4 to 1/2 a turn on the knurled head to remove the blank kept in the chuck to protect the integrity of the chuck, and placing the burr in thusly all the way into the chuck and turning the knurling firmly, not excessively, to tighten the burr into the chuck and removing the wrench. We are now ready to operate with the air turbine. In addition to the rotary cutting instruments, to complete the cavity preparation sequence, we have a number of hand cutting instruments displayed here, which will be applied to this preparatory sequence. The instrument on the camera at this time with the pointer is the hatchet number 1 and the enamel hatchet number 2. The chisel number 7 and the chisel number 6 and the margin trimmer, gingival margin trimmer T4, the mouth mirror, cowhorn explorer, S1 or spoon excavator number 1 and S2 spoon excavator number 2. The basic difference between the hatchet and chisel relates to the plane of the cutting edge and its relationship to the plane of the instrument. On the monitor right is the enamel hatchet instrument, in which the plane of the cutting edge is in the plane of the entire instrument. On the left of the monitor is the chisel. In this case, the cutting edge is at 90 degrees or at right angles to the plane of the instrument. This is a basic difference in application. The cutting edge, the character of the instrument beyond these differences is entirely the same. The gingival trimmer, or the T4 instrument, is a modified hatchet. Again, the plane of the cutting edge of this instrument is in the plane of the entire instrument. As with the H2 or number 2 hatchet, the difference between the H2 and the T4 instrument is the curved blade for lateral scraping action in the case of the T4, as opposed to a flat blade with the H2. And the other basic difference, if we can show it on camera, is the slant of the cutting edge in relationship to the axis of the blade. The hatchet, the H2 instrument, the cutting edge is at right angles to the axis of the blade. In the case of the T4 instrument, the cutting edge is not at right angles, but is at 95 centigrades from the central axis of the instrument. The S2, or spoon excavator, is also a modified hatchet. It also has a curved blade terminating in a round cutting edge, but the cutting edge is in the same plane as the cutting edge of the enamel hatchet, putting it into the hatchet group. It is therefore a modified hatchet. We have discussed briefly the rotary and hand cutting instruments. It is our major objective now to apply these instruments to a practical dental problem. We have mounted a mandibular molar extracted tooth in a stone block for convenience, which has occlusal pit and fissure caries visible here, which require a Class 1 type occlusal preparation, and we will apply the rotary and appropriate hand cutting instruments to this sequence so that we can prepare the cavity and so that we can identify walls, floors, cover the cavity nomenclature which would result from this procedure. Then we will extend the preparation to involve the mesial surface of the tooth, which has an incipient carious lesion visible on the mesial surface and on the monitor. And if we swing the camera to the mounted X-ray of this tooth, we can see on that X-ray the proximal lesion, which we identified on the surface. If we look at the occlusal pit and fissure areas, we see a slight shadow or evidence of the caries in that direction. However, because of the thickness of the enamel and the dimension of the enamel buccolingually, it is very difficult to demonstrate caries in this area by the radiograph alone. We will now proceed to initiate a Class 1 preparation on the occlusal or surface 5 of the mandibular right second molar. To initiate the Class 1 preparation on the molar, we'll utilize the air turbine with a number 2 round carbide burr as the opening or penetrating instrument. The objective here will be to penetrate through the enamel layer into the dentin layer and initiate the extension cutting. Now, this instrument will be rotating at approximately 250 to 300,000 revolutions per minute. And although in a clinic situation we would normally be using a water coolant, in the preclinical program we do not utilize water. Therefore, we will cut this dry on camera. Now, I have penetrated in the central area into the dentin, and I'm extending mesially and distally toward the marginal ridge, as we said, with the number 2 round carbide burr. The action is a brushing action. We do not stay any length of time on one area. We will move into the grooves buccally and lingually, and then we will stop with the penetrating instrument and switch to the 57 fissure burr, plain fissure burr, for the extension type cut. The round burr with the curved blade is an excellent penetrating instrument. The fissure burr is essentially designed for lateral cutting efficiency and procedure. It is now our purpose to extend at a depth slightly into the dentin, to extend the Class 1 preparation internally and externally to its final proper outline form. Again, we use a rather careful, controlled, light touch with a brushing action on the instrument, wiping, not staying sustainedly in contact, but lightly scribing the outline, extending into the groove and fissure areas which are involved. I will stop and rotate that instrument so that we can see, that tooth, so that we can see the general character of the outline form. If we look into the prepared cavity at this point, we can see the dentin pulpal floor and the walls to the buccal, lingual, mesial, and distal. This is a one-surface cavity preparation in the roughed-out stage, unfinished stage. If we look closely, we can see some minor evidence of the developmental fissures. There is no residual caries in this area. We are still slightly in enamel on the pulpal floor. We'll take the same instrument and just deepen slightly the pulpal floor, which we will identify more specifically on a larger model, which will be a little easier perhaps to see and identify. Now again we can see by looking into the prepared cavity that the entire floor is in uninvolved dentin, relatively flat. We have extended distally and mesially to include involved fissures or grooves, and buccally and lingually to eliminate any questionable or possibly carious tooth tissue. At this point, we will switch to a sectioned crown. We will present a situation from this sectioned Class 1 preparation showing a carious lesion remaining in the lingual occlusal wall and on the pulpal floor. We will switch our rotary cutting to the low-speed contra-angle utilizing a number 4 round steel burr. To remove the caries which extends into, you chip air lightly, into the lingual occlusal wall, and into the pulpal floor. Please notice that this sequence is being carried out with the low speed, low RPMs, light touch on the burr, with the purpose of removing caries completely from the prepared cavity. We can now see, we enter with a Cowhorn Explorer, we can see that the lesion has been completely removed. We have in fact created a defect involving the lingual occlusal wall and a segment of the pulpal floor. In the final cavity situation, this defect will be closed with an insulating cement base. Before completing the caries removal sequence, the spoon excavator, in addition to the rotary instruments, primarily the round burr, are also utilized in the caries removal sequence. We identified this hand-cutting modified hatchet type instrument earlier in the sequence, and this would be a more or less traditional or classic example of the instrument in action. A lateral scraping on primarily dentin type surface to be sure that all of the caries process has been eliminated. We will now go back to the original model, having roughed out the basic cavity preparation, having shown the removal of caries or an excavating sequence on a sectioned crown. We will go back to the original and simply at low speeds, using the 57 burr, smooth the walls and floors at perhaps a rotational speed of 7,500 to 8,000 RPMs. A light touch, fairly firm application of the instrument, leaning on the enamel walls slightly to remove any unsupported enamel rods, cleaning up the preparation preparatory to placing a restorative material. Next, we will extend the Class 1 preparation into the mesial proximal and develop a two-surface MO or Class 2 preparation. Before we move in that direction, let's briefly look at a large model of the Class 1. Is that pointer? The model being viewed essentially from the same approach we were utilizing on the extracted tooth, perhaps will give us a view of the walls and floors so that we can identify the basic nomenclature elements. We are looking at the dentin surface overlying the pulp, and this would be termed the pulpal floor. This being the lingual surface of the tooth, the inclines of the distal and mesial lingual cusps, the wall of the preparation lying in that direction is the lingual occlusal wall. Buccal surface of the tooth, we have the buccal occlusal wall. Distally, the distal occlusal wall. Mesially, the mesial occlusal wall. The junction of two walls, such as the lingual occlusal and pulpal walls, results in a line angle, the lingual occlusal pulpal line angle, or the distal occlusal pulpal line angle. The convergent point of three walls, such as the buccal occlusal, distal occlusal, pulpal area, would result in a point angle. We will now proceed and complete the preparation on the extracted mandibular molar utilizing a 57 burr. We will thin the mesial marginal ridge at approximately the depth of the pulpal floor, moving mesially into the ridge toward the carious lesion, leaving a intact enamel membrane to protect the approximating tooth, which inevitably exists in the mouth situation. We will then switch from the 57 burr, having thinned the ridge, to a half round burr with which we will make a penetrating cut in a cervical direction at, or perhaps just a bit on the dentin side of the dental enamel junction. Half round is a excellent penetrating instrument, and we will proceed to initiate the penetrating cut, pendulating slightly in a buccal lingual direction so that the penetration will extend to or slightly beyond the carious lesion, which we demonstrated on the radiograph and which we can see from this exposed view of the mesial surface of the tooth. We have now penetrated internally in a cervical direction with the half-round burr. We have a cut which, in pendulating buccolingually, initiates within the tooth, but we have not broken out into the proximal, initiates the proximal box. We will now utilize an extending type cutting instrument, in this case the 57 plain Fisher burr, and complete, following our internal cut, we'll complete the proximal box to a depth and to a degree buccolingually, which will eliminate the carious lesion for which this procedure is being carried out. With the turbine, we have succeeded in roughing out the proximal box, which, if you'll recall, has included the area, this area of incipient caries, positioned slightly on the lingual side of the mesial surface of the tooth. We will now switch to the low-speed contraangle, utilizing again a plain Fisher burr for the refinement stage of the preparation, following which we will utilize a hand instrument or two to demonstrate the application of the hand instrument in the refining of the tooth preparation, the Class 2. At low speed now, with again a controlled RPMs and coming in perhaps from an unusual position so that we can see this action on camera, we will sharpen the internal details, smoothing walls and floors, blending the occlusal portion into the proximal portion, eliminating sharp, rough surfaces and smoothing the enamel and dentin walls internally within the prepared cavity. At this point, we will switch to a hand cutting instrument, the enamel hatchet described in the earlier sequence, to demonstrate the planing action along the proximal walls and the cervical floor. Notice how the instrument is applied against that wall. Notice the cutting action, the removing of extraneous enamel rods. We'll switch to the right of the pair and apply the action to the buccal proximal wall and into the line angle created by the cervical floor and the proximal wall on the buccal. Hand instrument is a very effective refining instrument It should always be used following the rotary cutting contacts. The chisel, the CH7 instrument may also be functional in this situation to plane and sharpen axial cervical line angles and sharpen the point angles in the proximal cervical axial area, as we see here. We will now switch to a cutaway version of this preparation, which will give us an opportunity to gain some insight into the action of the burr within the cavity preparation. The Fisher burr is an excellent instrument to refine and finalize, as we see in this view, to refine the lingual occlusal wall, the distal occlusal wall, to smoothen the pulpal floor, to create the axial wall and the cervical floor, and to smoothen and refine the lingual proximal wall. The half-round burr, used as a penetrating instrument in the early stages of the development of the box, is utilized to initiate through penetrating internally, and the action of this instrument, which we can see fairly well on camera, would be to create an initial cut in this particular area, following which the application of the Fisher burr will complete the proximal action. And the purpose of retaining a thin enamel membrane in this area is, of course, to protect a tooth approximating from any burr contact during cutting procedures. We will now switch to a large model so that we can demonstrate from this particular view the walls and floors which the Class 2 preparation has. We mentioned in the Class 1 version the pulpal floor, extending this preparation now in a cervical direction to create a mesial box, mesial proximal box. The wall internally is the axial wall, which we can see rather well on camera here. The wall joining the buccal occlusal wall at some point in this area is the buccal proximal wall. Following in a cervical direction, the line angle here initiates the cervical wall or floor. Following across the cervical floor into this line angle, we initiate the lingual proximal wall. And moving occlusally, we relate to the previously determined lingual occlusal wall, so that the proximal box adds a buccal proximal, cervical, lingual proximal, and axial wall to the initial Class 1 preparation. The junction of the pulpal floor and the axial wall results in the axial pulpal line angle here. The axial wall joining the cervical wall or floor results in the axial cervical line angle. And if we look at the point angle, which is the junction of three walls, axial, lingual proximal, and cervical walls converging into the axial, lingual proximal, cervical point angle. This completes the wall and floor designations of the Class 2 preparation.
You've been listening to a presentation from the University of Michigan School of Dentistry, which is dedicated to supporting open learning and open educational resources. This recording is licensed under the Creative Commons. It may be reused and redistributed for nonprofit use. Please attribute materials to the University of Michigan School of Dentistry and redistribute under this same license. For more information on how this and other University of Michigan School of Dentistry recordings may be used, visit www.dent.umich.edu/license.